In 1986, on the 100th anniversary of Vancouver's founding, the Vancouver Historical Society convened to determine who had been the Vancouverite of the century. You may be surprised to learn that rather than choosing a politician, businessman, or explorer, they instead chose a Caribbean bartender, lifeguard, and swim teacher. Seraphim Joe Fortes was an unlikely hero, a gentle giant who came to represent to Vancouverites the values of service, kindness, and modesty. His story is all the more remarkable because he was a black man in an overwhelmingly white city, in a time when overt racism was the norm. And today, February 9th, is his birthday. During the 34 years he spent as a lifeguard on the beaches of English Bay, he saved countless lives, taught thousands of children to swim, and inspired the city with his magnetic personality. Joe's heartwarming story reminds us of a smaller and friendlier Vancouver of a bygone era. Joe was born in Trinidad around 1865, but left home as a young man, traveling first to Liverpool and then, in 1885, to Vancouver on the ship the Robert Kerr. His first recorded act of heroism came less than a year later. Just weeks after the city was officially founded, the Great Fire of Vancouver destroyed, well, pretty much the entire city. At the time, Joe was working as a shoeblack at the Sunnyside Hotel, just off Maple Tree Square. Seeing the flames roaring down Water Street, he leapt into action, running into a burning building and pulling out the wife and 8-year-old son of the local member of parliament, saving their lives. After the fire, the city rebuilt, pretty much overnight, and Joe became a bartender at the Bodega Saloon. In no time, he was the most popular person in town. One day, when Joe was feeling unwell, the Daily News advertiser thought it was newsworthy enough to write a story about it.
Men went about with a sad look on their faces. Dogs wore a dejected air, and even the rats seemed to feel the general depression. The cause of the universal sadness was the fact that Mr. Joe Fortes was suffering from indisposition. He looked quite pale as he sat in a chair and mused on the mutability of human affairs. All the leading physicians were in attendance, and hourly bulletins were issued.
Thankfully, Joe quickly recovered. In 1887, Joe was rowing along the densely forested coastline between Vancouver and Jerry's Cove, which is now Jericho Beach. He came across the perfect beach for swimming. It had white, sandy shores and easy, rolling surf. He rowed back to the city, determined to find a trail to this beach. It might be hard to imagine today, but back then, the entire West End was still old-growth forest, and there was no obvious land access to this beach. There was one trail, though, long used by the Squamish people, and Joe soon found it and then spread word of his new swimming hole. The beach, originally known by the Squamish people as Aoshun, or Good Footing, soon quickly became known as Joe's Beach. Today, it goes by a name you might find familiar. It's called English Bay. Joe devoted his free time to making the beach a safe and peaceful place. As his beach's popularity grew, he successfully convinced the mayor to build a proper road through the forest. The mayor felt he owed it to Joe. After all, the woman and her son who Joe had saved in the Great Fire, they were the mayor's in-laws. The wooden plank trail they built to the beach is now called Denman Street. Joe became the unofficial lifeguard, teaching children to swim in all his spare hours. Swimming as an activity was a fairly new concept to Europeans, and was just really catching on for the first time amongst white Canadians, though Indigenous people had been swimming for centuries. In fact, they introduced the freestyle stroke to shocked and scandalized British people who only knew of an awkward kind of breaststroke. For obvious reasons, many of these swimmers needed rescuing. Thankfully, Joe, who was an accomplished swimmer, was there to save them. He is officially credited with saving 29 lives, but the actual number is estimated to be well over 100. Joe's reassuring presence on the beach became an iconic part of Vancouver's identity in those days. In 1900, a petition demanded that Joe be instated as the official lifeguard, complete with title and salary. Thousands of supportive Vancouverites signed their name, and the motion was approved. Joe was appointed swim instructor, lifeguard, and special constable of English Bay, with a salary of $80 a month. He retired from bartending and moved into a little cottage that once stood just above the beach, so he could keep an eye on the young swimmers. It wasn't all smooth sailing. Every good story needs a villain, and in this story that's Thomas Nealons, Vancouver's puritanical, cost-cutting mayor from 1902 to 1903. He worked furiously to fire Joe, and introduced a motion to the Parks Board abolishing his lifeguard position. The move provoked public outrage. Over 2,000 people, including many of the city's most prominent citizens, came out to support Joe. Nealons was chastised and forced to back down. By 1910, many of the children Joe had taught to swim, and whose lives he had saved, had now grown up, and many had become prominent in Vancouver's tight-knit society. With genuine gratitude, a ceremony was held at the Vancouver Board of Trade to present Joe with a gold watch and $472 raised by the community. That's over $10,000 in today's money. One Vancouverite, who'd moved to California, wired in a $10 contribution with a telegram that read, "If this was my last $10, Joe would have half of it." In 1919, while rescuing the crew of a shipwrecked Japanese fishing boat, Joe caught a cold. He never fully recovered. He developed pneumonia and was forced to give up lifeguarding. Joe died on February 4th, 1922, at the age of 57. There was no question that Joe would be afforded the extremely rare honor of a civic funeral. Such was the esteem in which he was held. His casket was borne through the city, led by a mounted police honor guard, and followed by Vancouver's mayor and council, many of whom he had taught to swim. Trailing behind his hearse was the little lifeboat, which he had used to save so many lives. As the procession neared Joe's beach, the crowd swelled, and soon tens of thousands of people lined the streets to bid Joe farewell. It remains the largest funeral in Vancouver's history. The Vancouver Daily Mail described the day.
In every school of Greater Vancouver, thousands of children stood with bowed heads in tribute to a parted friend, and the thoughts of many a businessman were mellowed by the realization of a great loss. Great financiers, worthy statesmen, and captains of industry have been honored in the past by public demonstration and pompous funeral, but seldom by the universal and generally heartfelt tribute of affection which marked the laying to rest this morning of Vancouver's Joe.
His tombstone at Mount View Cemetery simply said Joe, because everyone knew who he was. That other plaque was added later on. After growing up in Vancouver, it's hard to imagine a story like this that has any kind of modern parallel. How one person can inspire so much love and affection across the whole community and leave such a lasting impact that he was voted Vancouverite of the Century over 60 years after his death. It's a truly remarkable story. Thanks for watching this historical video from On the Spot. If you want to learn more about Joe, you can download the On the Spot app and take the Joe Fortes walking tour in English Bay. And if you enjoyed this video, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.